Tonight, we enter a realm where possibility becomes a living force and vision becomes the architect of reality. Joining us is Dylan Borland, a mind who has spent years exploring how imagination shapes identity, opportunity, and the trajectory of a life. Together, we dive into the creative engine within us all, the imagination, not as fantasy but as a transformative power capable of reshaping what we believe is possible. So, welcome, Taran. Welcome to Aura Room. It's always a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much for having me here, and pleasure to be here and be talking with you.
All right. So, Dylan, when you talk about the power of imagination, what do you feel people overlook or underestimate most about this inner faculty?
Yeah, that's a great question to start us off with. I think two things come to mind. The first thing is that Neville Goddard used to say often that you're creating one way or another. All of us human beings are creating our outer world, but a lot of us are creating our outer world unconsciously, right? And so we're not aware of the thoughts and the feelings that we keep repeating to ourselves over and over again that then translate and show up in our outer world. And so, there's an old saying that used to say if you knew how powerful your words were, you would watch every word that comes out of your mouth. And so, a lot of the work that we do at the Caden Academy is helping people move from what we call unconscious creation, which is a lot of us, right? That's how a lot of the world is operating, to taking back control and being the conscious creators. Because what we know is that everything that we believe to be true in our subconscious mind, in our inner world, the world is like a mirror. It will reflect it back to us over time. And so that's the first thing I want to mention. And I forgot the second one, so we'll stick with that one.
Great. I mean, definitely words have a lot of power on the world surrounding us, on other people, and it shapes the way our life turns out to be. So, definitely. So, Dylan, do you find that people struggle more with a lack of imagination or with mistrusting the visions they do have?
Yeah, I think I do run into people that have trouble with the imagination, with the visualization, but that doesn't take very long to overcome with practice. The thing that I find where the vast majority of people, including myself for some time, would always fall off is faith. And faith not from a religious standpoint or dogmatic standpoint, but faith in terms of continuing to hold that visualization, continuing to hold, some people might call it a manifestation, despite what your outer world is saying to you. Because we know that if we continue to hold that scene in our mind and we continue to feel it with all of our senses, over time, our outer world must reflect back to us our innermost beliefs. But when months go by, or sometimes even years go by, that's where people's faith gets tested. And so it's faith is where the vast majority of people fall off a cliff and go back to being themselves.
Definitely. But do you think that, as people grow up, they lose the, tendency to imagine things? And why do you think that happens? And if so, how can, as we grow up, we lose the tendency or the ability to imagine things? So, how can we as people bring that part of, ourselves back? Or why do you think that happens in the first place?
Well, it happens because we get consumed by life, right? And we forget our playful nature. We forget that we're here to play, that we're here to create, and life and responsibilities begin to get in the way. And a lot of people just don't have the time any longer, like we did as children, to sit down and imagine and play and create and visualize. And I think a lot of the cultures around the world too, they embrace work and work and work and work, but they don't embrace creativity and play. And they don't embrace like things like sitting down and doing meditation and visualizing, right? And so these are like, it's like a muscle. we all have the ability to sit down and visualize like we did as kids and use the power of the imagination. But it's like if I didn't work out or use my arms for a year, I'd lose all my muscles, right? They're still there. I can get them back, but I just have to spend the time working on getting them back. Same thing, if people are paralyzed and they're in a chair, they lose their muscles in their legs. The legs are still there. The ability is still there. And so, our imagination is a lot like that. And so I encourage people to spend, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, in just stillness. Just sit with your eyes closed. For me, oftentimes I'll go out to my truck or my car where I can get away just for 10 minutes and just invite back that playfulness and invite back that meditation. And just starting with like a mindfulness practice, like you would find in Buddhist traditions as well, right? And maybe in some Hindu traditions also, just sitting and being mindful of what's around you, the sounds, the sights, the smells. And then gradually over time, start to bring in that imagination and start to just, it's like dreaming, right? And so instead of going to bed to dream, just sit down for 10 minutes and dream again. And then when you begin to have that be a habit and become a habit in your life, you can very quickly, just like that example of the muscles that we used to use, you can very quickly regain that strength again. But it's taking the time every day, even if it's 10 minutes, and the easiest time for most people is right as they're laying down to go to sleep. Begin that playful imagination again. Everybody has the time. You're already in bed. You're already ready to go to sleep. Or the first thing when you wake up in the morning before you get out of bed. Set your timer or your alarm 10 minutes earlier and invite that play, invite that imagination back again. And so I think those are very simple things people can start to, because during a work day, you all get busy and it becomes hard to do something like that. But certainly everybody's going to bed and certainly everybody's waking up. And so those 10-minute windows are the best time to kind of re-invite that play and that imagination back again.
Absolutely. And I believe that's part of the reason why, things used to be so colorful as children, but as we grew up, the world became more and more black and white because we lost the ability to imagine things better. And yes, like you said, the trick is not to let your inner child die. So moving on, Dylan, how has imagination personally redirected your life or opened pathways that logic alone never could?
Yes, that's it. So nowadays, I've been doing this for some time, but it's just become habitual. It's become automatic, like your heart beats or your lungs breathe. And it shapes every facet of my life personally. I everything that I want to do and accomplish, whether it be from us on a podcast today to watching our new course grow and things like that, to envisioning myself out on stages speaking, all the way down to activities and hobbies. I like to hunt and I like to fish. And right now, where I live in northern Michigan, it's hunting season, it's deer season. And so I use the power of my imagination to visualize myself getting deer and getting turkeys and getting fish and seeing that and feeling that and bringing them back home to the family. Right. And so it shapes for me every aspect of my life, but it's just become a way of life at this point. And it doesn't start that way. It takes some effort, it takes some consistency, it takes some time, but over time you realize that you are the conscious creator of your outer world. And then when you fully believe that and you fully embody that, then you move through life. You transition from moving through life like so many of us do, where we feel like life is happening to us, like we have no control. Or if you're a religious person, you feel like it's all out of your hands and it's in God's hands. And God's got some sort of master plan and control for you. But you remember that you are God, that the power of God is flowing through you, that you are creation, and that everything that you believe to be true is reflected back to you in your outer world. You begin to take back control of your outer experiences. You realize that life is not happening to you. You're not a victim of your circumstances, that you are in complete control. And, Wayne Dyer used to say, if you want to change your life, change your mind, change your thoughts, and you'll change your life. And so that's what a lot of this work is, right? It's helping people remember that you are in complete control. You're not in the back seat of the car anymore. You're in that driver's seat. And so then you move away from what so many of us feel, all of that stress and grind of daily life, that feeling of survival, that feeling of having to make the next dollar and force it to happen. And how am I going to pay the bills and how am I going to pay the rent? And what most people forget is that those feelings of fear, those feelings of lack begin to attract more of the same to you. So then you get stuck in these cycles of fear. You get stuck in these cycles of scarcity. You get stuck in these cycles of lack because that's what you believe and that's what you're focused on and that's what you're putting out there. And so it's interrupting those cycles, recontextualizing them, and getting into alignment. And then life starts to flow. It's not a struggle. You don't worry about how your next bill is going to be paid, how the rent's going to be paid. You just trust in the flow and the divine nature of everything. The birds don't worry. The fishes don't worry. You don't have to worry. You worry, and then you get more of worry. You get more fear. You get more lack. You get more scarcity. You get more struggles. And so the trick is interrupting that process through awareness.
Definitely. And like I always say in my other podcasts, that life is not happening to us, it's happening through us. And I think that's a very unique way of looking at, life that changes our whole perspective. And we realize that what we think has a deeper impact on how we feel and what happens to us. So thank you so much for sharing that. So, Dylan, was there a defining moment when you realized that imagination was not just creative play, but a real force in your evolution?
Yeah, for me, it started very early. I started when I was 16, the practice of mindfulness. And then I got really fascinated with the ability of the body to heal through the power of the mind. And I started researching and seeing examples of people that would heal themselves through thought alone. And in fact, I just did a section in a YouTube video I made last week where I had reminded people, like, I remember a story during that time as well too, where like they did studies on people that could think, literally just think themselves strong and watch physical muscles build up on their body through thoughts alone and just through thinking. And I've often told, and I've spoken with you before, my own stories on healing my back and healing my gallbladder and healing different things in my body. And those were kind of things in my mind where I said, wow, like, at first it was like, okay, here's stories of people that are healing themselves. Big people like Joe Dispenza and then all his students and other people as well. I used to study. And then I had circumstances pop up in my life where I said, well, I'm convinced. I know the power of the mind. I know it can do anything. And so then I started to practice them for myself and began to see healing in myself. And then from there, every time you realize and you have kind of a win under your belt in terms of using your mind to accomplish something, your faith grows stronger, your faith grows deeper. Because then you realize, yeah, anytime your faith starts to wane, you look back at all the situations in your life where through the power of your thought, through the power of your imagination alone, you kind of have this checklist of wins that you can refer back to when your faith starts to get weak, right? And there've been countless examples in my life as well, from my marriage and relationships to my business, to everything. So, but those were kind of some of my very early taste of what the mind could do.
It's really fascinating how everything is just so interconnected. And what you just said, it reminded me of the placebo effect. And I'm sure that yeah, it's an effect of that. So, hearing that makes the entire concept feel relatable. It's a reminder that imagination isn't an escape, it's often the first spark that pulls us into our next chapter. So, moving on, Dylan, in your work, how do you help people rebuild their imaginative capacity after years of routine, doubt, or conditioning?
Yeah. So the first step is really just awareness. Because if you're unaware that there's something you want to change, you can't change it, right? You only operate on based on what you know, what you're aware of. And so having conversations like this and podcasts like this and people being exposed to these stories and this type of information, that helps with the awareness. And so the first step is awareness. Oh, okay. I've heard this. I've heard people heal. I've heard people transform their lives and their business and their finances and their relationships. And then it gets you thinking, and then it gets you exploring, and then you get led into different paths and avenues. And then from there, it's that power of that imagination. And so we teach a very simple way in which people can very easily begin to use that imagination to transform their outer circumstances. And what we usually teach is like, the best time to do this, pick a scenario in your mind that you want to transform. It could be a relationship, it could be an opportunity. You might just want to say to yourself, I need a little boost in income, you know, and it'd be nice to have an extra $100 today or whatever it is. And so to sit down in those hours, Neville Goddard used to say, to sit down in states akin to sleep. And so as our body begins to fall asleep, or our body is waking up, or even at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, your mind and your subconscious mind is in that state akin to sleep, where it's very programmable. And we know that the subconscious mind is the mechanism that brings about our outer world. And so as you're falling asleep, or when you're waking up is the easiest for most people, let's say you wanted to have a boost in income. You wanted a random $50 to appear in your bank account. Because that's something that I've talked about this week. It's fresh in my mind. You would visualize a very short scene in your mind that would imply that that has already happened. And so you wouldn't visualize a scene leading up to that. You would visualize a scene, for example, like some point this week, somebody sent you random money, or you check your bank account and there's an extra $50 in it, right? So that it's already happened. And then you begin to feel that. What would you feel as if that has already happened? And in that visualization, it's just a short clip, a minute or two. You're going to feel it with all of your senses. Where are you sitting when you check your phone or your bank account? What's the seat feel like, or the bed feel like? Are you on the streets? Are you in a coffee shop? What sounds are happening around you? What smells? All of the senses. Utilize all of your senses. And then you begin to feel that as it has already happened. It could even be a conversation with somebody in your, that, hey, congratulations. Like, I don't know how you did it, but you got $100 the other day. Maybe your friend's telling you that. Scenes that have already implied it's happened. And then you continue to loop that in your mind over and over and over with the feeling. It's just a 1 or 2 minute segment. And you hold that feeling and you hold that scene in your mind every night as you go to bed, or every morning when you wake up. And with time, sometimes it happens in a day. There's been next day something happens, or same day something happens, or within the week something happens. You don't concern yourself with the timing of it. You continue to hold that feeling and that vision as you fall asleep every night, or when you wake up in the morning, or both, and your outer world will bring that back to you. And so it's very simple in process, but I think the part that most people miss is you treat it as almost a memory, as if it has happened. Not wanting to happen, not hoping that it's going to happen. It has to be so real and so vivid in your mind that you forget that it has not yet showed up in your outer world. It's like a memory, something that has already happened, if that makes sense. And you just continue to hold that, and it will show up at some point. And sometimes is quite literal, and sometimes is very close to what it is that you had imagined. But oftentimes it's almost quite literal, word for word, scenario for scenario.
That definitely makes a lot of sense, and I think many people call that manifestation as well. And that layered approach resonates because reclaiming imagination feels like reclaiming permission to think bigger, feel deeper, and break patterns that keep us small. So, didn't some say that imagination is spiritual, but others call it psychological. Where do you believe it actually lives?
So I think, if we want to look at life in in a physical realm, and we look at these bodies as physical, you'll discover that this powerhouse of creation seems to reside within that subconscious mind. And so it's the subconscious mind which is producing everything in your outer world. And the way it produces it is whatever your innermost beliefs and convictions are. So whatever you deeply believe to be true, whatever you deeply like you that's your belief. You know, you believe you're unlucky, the world's going to reflect that back to you. And so that all stems from that subconscious mind from a biological, description, if that's what you want to say.
Yes, so basically somewhere in between our reality and between what goes in our mind. So yeah, I mean, do you think that imagination taps into something uniquely personal or something collective and universal?
So my what I've experimented with and understand is that there is one consciousness, and that one consciousness is expressing itself through all beings, through all things. So I tend to look at consciousness, God, creation, source, universe, a lot of people call it in the spiritual world. It's all God. I often say it's all God. It's all consciousness. God is creative being. God is creation. God is always creating and expressing himself, herself, itself, however you want to relate to it, through all things. And so there's this kind of universal consciousness, this universal energy, this universal power that is having fun. It's you, it's me, it's everybody involved, and it's all having fun. It's all creating. Life is creation, existence is creation. And so, a lot of religious texts, a lot of spiritual texts will say there's one God or there's multiple gods. It's all the same energy, it's all the same frequency. And it's whatever you believe. So if you believe there's 7 different gods that are helping you, then that will transform into your outer world. If you believe it's one, same thing. You get to choose.
Yes, I believe that it is different for everyone depending on what they believe in. And that opens such an intriguing doorway. It positions imagination not just as a mental tool, but as a bridge between inner truth and shared human potential. So, lastly, Dylan, when someone imagines a life far beyond their current circumstances, how do they distinguish between inspired vision and escapism?
Well, I think escapism is something that we have defined as human beings, like we're trying to escape from reality, right? A lot of people will numb themselves with drugs and alcohol and other vices, right, as escape. But then I think you're still in that scenario, someone is still very much identified with their body, with this physical experience. And as you begin the work and the inner work and the inner transformation, some people call it awakening, some people call it remembering. You realize that you're not your body, you're not this physical presence, that you are God, that you are creation, that you are, like Wayne Dyer used to say, you are a spiritual being having a human experience. And so when you remember that, this idea of escapism dissolves, right? And you realize that you've no longer begin to identify yourself with this physical world and this physical state. And you realize that you are God, you are creation, and that you're playing and that life is completely in your control. And so a lot of the work that I do is we say, remember who you are, remember the power, remember your abilities that you have, because like Alan Watts used to say, he has a great lecture on where he basically describes life as a play. And a lot of times we get consumed. If you think about you're an actor in the movie, you get consumed in your role. Whatever role that you're playing, you've forgotten that you are creation, that it's a play, and that you can step out at any point in time and change the act, change the script, change the entire movie if you want to. Create a whole new identity for yourself. And so I always encourage people just to sit with that idea for a little bit, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, amazing. Your insight gives imagination a grounded existence, showing that creativity and responsibility can coexist beautifully in shaping a meaningful life. So, before we wrap this up, Dylan, could you share with our listeners how can they connect with you? How can they learn more about imagination, manifestation? So, please share with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for asking. The best way to connect with me is on my website. It's cadenacademy.com, spelled Caden. So cadenacademy.com. And we just launched actually our 12-week, so it's a 90-day, 3-month, 12-week inner transformation course where we help people remember who they are and begin to move from that unconscious state, that unconscious creation to what we call conscious creation. Some might call it manifestation. We call it conscious creation. And the first 3 weeks of that course are completely free. And so that's a wonderful place for listeners if they want to kind of deepen their understanding of this concept. They want to deepen their practices and imagination and using their imagination to shape their outer world. That's a wonderful 12-week program to get involved in. And then we've also got a book on the website, which is just a 50-page book. So if somebody wants to go right to playing with their imagination to shape their outer world, like we talked about, you can download that book. There's times where I think it's even free on Kindle or Amazon. The link will take you there as well. So it's either free or low cost, however it's set up to promote itself. But those are two great places, and you can get them all right from that website. So thank you for asking.
Great. So I'll have all the details on my show listing, and our listeners can directly connect with you and learn more from you. So thank you, Dylan, for bringing such clarity and depth to a faculty we often take for granted. For everyone listening, let this be your invitation to awaken your inner visionary. Don't dismiss the images that rise within you. They may be the first threads of a future waiting to unfold. Lean into them, trust them, and let your imagination become the quiet power that reshapes your world from the inside out.